Welcome, welcome. Good morning and afternoon. And it is really good to welcome all of you to the Movement Cafe. The Movement Cafe, as you know, meets every month on the third Wednesday. And I know I see a lot of people here who have actually joined us many times before, so welcome. If you are new here and this is the first time that you've popped into a Movement Cafe, it's a very, we tend to like to have conversations. We usually bring very specific guests, but always the goal of, really trying to get at that intersection of United Methodism and creation justice. What's going on in the denomination? How can we support each other? How can we be present for each other? So that is one of the things that just really is the focus here when we're together. This is a kind space. So my name is Rashinda Fairhurst, and I am ordained clergy and living in Oregon. I live in sort of greater Northwest area, which includes Washington, Alaska, parts of Idaho. I, of course, work with the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement and glad to, and also work with Fossil Free UMC and other efforts. So if you would like it, it would be wonderful if you could put your name and where you're from in the chat. It's just good to create a community that way. So today we're going to be doing things a little differently. So we're going to be kind of sharing. A number of us were at General Conference. Many more of us were watching the live stream, participating that way. And a lot of creation justice goals, like pretty much all of them, got over the finish line. We did tremendous work at General Conference. The work of this movement over the last number of years, kind of tracing it back to 2019, when a group in Tennessee had a summit together. And if I can find it, I might post that article from News in the chat. And you'll see some of the usual suspects in there, people gathering to say something has to happen. We must move things forward in the United Methodist Church. Out of that, the movement was born. And out of that, even through a pandemic, we have just moved the bar in General Conference. And the steps in front of us are going to be big ones still as those things are rolled out. And so really encourage all of you to stay involved. And if you're not already, be part of a group, because if you join the annual conference group or the advocacy group, all these groups will be intersecting with some of the new things that we're going to be doing. And those are yet to be determined, right? That's part of the beauty of being in a movement, is we sort of look at that together and figure out what it is we need and where we want to go. So I've talked a lot today. So thank you for putting your information in the chat. That's awesome. And I'm going to actually turn it over to Kathy. She's going to talk more about the movement, even though I did talk a little bit about that. I'm just, I guess, feeling pretty pleased with how things went. So go ahead, Kathy.
Well, I do see on our agenda that Dawn was going to say a couple things, agreements and recording. Do you want to do that, Dawn?
Go ahead, Dawn.
Sure, of course. So welcome, everybody. We're thrilled that you're here. I think this is going to be a really exciting and interesting meeting. And as Rashinda kind of touched on, this is a safe place. We do respect each other. We do listen to each other, as she said. So I think we're probably good, but we just want to remind everybody of that, of course. And this meeting is being recorded, so be aware of that. And as you know, we will have a video of the meetings for people who weren't able to attend, or for any of you who want to go back and review what was said. So those are kind of the agreements, and I'm gonna turn it back to you, either Rashinda or Kathy.
Sure, I'll jump right in. I'm seeing some other folks joining in that are coming in now. So I'm glad we kind of are up at the front end, making space for people to join. So hi, welcome. I'm Kathy Velasquez Everhart, a layperson in the Minnesota Annual Conference, a commissioned Earth Keeper, and one of many leaders in the creation justice movement. I'm going to just give you a couple minutes about this movement, which many of you have helped create, so you're familiar with it, but I think it does help to understand kind of where we came from, in that this United Methodist Church that we all are part of has had commitments to support the work of the creation and a vocation and a calling to heal our relationship with the planet and with all other living creatures. And yet that work is, there's more we can do, and there's certainly a growing urgency of doing that work. And so as more of us started to realize that, as we met each other at Earthkeeper trainings, as we met each other at Creation Justice conferences and later summits, that impulse to do more and to have a place where we can dream together and plan together rose to the top. And so really at the beginning of 2020, that's when this movement really kind of got its name, got a website, got communication tools to connect ourselves. But that work really continues both amongst those of us as individuals, but also local churches, annual conferences, and the many boards and agencies that have had these kind of commitments. You'll hear us talking as we talk about and reflect on General Conference about the ways that United Women in Faith, Global Ministries, Church and Society, Higher Education, Discipleship Ministries, all of these great parts of the church have really been crucial and integral to this movement and are part of the dreams that we have in terms of going forward. A lot of the work has shaped itself into work teams. So just again, we'll mention those that we have teams working on worship materials, on solar, on advocacy, on communications, on wild churches, on green teams, on annual conference organizing, and of course we had a number of people really focused on general conference planning, and all of those work teams are in place to continue this work, and we know that there will be other teams needed. And if you think of something or have a passion for something that isn't yet named, hasn't yet been created, my guess is there's others who are interested, and so reach out and let us know, and we'll get a new group in place. I'm excited to see so many of you here today, and so I'm going to just turn it back to Rashinda to start out with the conversation of reflecting on what just happened at Charlotte for the Creation Justice Movement and beyond.
Okay, I promised that article from 2019, and here it is. So basically, this is just going to be a conversation today, which is, I mean, awesome. And so I'm going to encourage people, if you want to ask questions or raise your hand or put a question in the chat. We have a few folks who are going to be sharing kind of from their perspective what happened at General Conference, but we also want to make sure that folks feel like they can ask questions or offer perspective. So Jonathan Brake is our first person to offer some feedback about what happened. And so Jonathan, go ahead.
All right. Well, welcome everybody again. I'm Jonathan Brake. If I've not met you yet, I am Western North Carolina Conference clergy. Helped to start the Creation Care Ministry for our annual conference several years ago. I've handed that off to Kim, Kim Richardson Richmond is here on your screen somewhere. She can wave and say hi. We have a great group here, but I have moved through a number of different things in my life, and I now work with Global Ministries in environmental sustainability. And as a commissioned United Methodist or Global Ministries Earthkeeper, I now oversee the Earthkeepers program. And so at General Conference, we had a chance to meet together and see each other. This is a picture of our Earthkeepers, many of whom you'll see on your screen now. We got to get together not on Zoom. We were in person for dinner on Earth Day, for worship, for a great time together to really celebrate and meet one another, some of us for the very first time. So General Conference gives opportunities like that just to reconnect with people and find that we do exist outside of a little box sitting on our desk or holding in our hand, and we have some wonderful things happening that way. I also, as a part of General Conference, got to oversee the newest UMCOR trailer. I'm going to pull up a picture here for you of the newest UMCOR trailer that is a micro grid that we can deploy from the Atlanta area anywhere, probably across the Southeast. And this microgrid trailer, inside of this trailer, you can have all kinds of solar panels. You can sort of see them laying on the ground back here. It's designed to bring into a church parking lot put the solar panels out across the ground, begin to absorb God's wonderful solar rays and turn them into energy for whatever we need to do when the grid goes down in a disaster response situation. So at General Conference, we got to actually demonstrate what this product can do for us. You'll notice under the tent, we were brewing coffee. I called it sun brewed coffee. And there's a ray of sunshine in everyone's cup. It was necessary to keep our delegates up and awake the second week of General Conference so they could make it through all their meetings. But we could charge things like a fan, a computer system. Over here are some backup batteries you could check out to recharge your devices. This trailer can power, when all of its solar panels are deployed, it can power a 3,500 square foot house. It can charge EVs. It can run power equipment. We can have several refrigerators to store medicine and different things needed in a disaster response area. And the people that came by to see this, I think this was the most important part for me anyway, was the people who came by to see this on display began to realize what our United Methodist Church is capable of when we're getting away from dirty fossil fuel generators and we're moving towards something like this. We can begin to develop it in ways like heat resiliency centers where we can have cooling tents and mist spray areas and things like that. And so as we are trying to say to the church, let's go net zero, this is one of those ways in which we at Global Ministries and UMCOR are moving in that direction, and we can do more of that in our annual conferences. So I just wanted to share with you a little bit of what I was able to be a part of during General Conference and give you a sense of what is there. So thanks. I'll throw it back to Rashinda.
Awesome. And we had a quick question in the chat, Jonathan. How much did that cost? What's the cost on those trailers?
That is a wonderful question. And I don't remember the exact amount of money that this particular trailer cost. I will say there are a lot of partners that helped make this happen. And let me pull up another picture where you can see this. So this particular trailer is not owned by the United Methodist Church. It's stewarded by the North Georgia Annual Conference. But you'll notice on the side of it here, Footprints Project does a lot of this kind of work in disaster areas. They're headquartered out of Florida. The Ray C. Anderson Foundation, if you've been around the Atlanta area or in northern Georgia, you've heard of them. Their foundation helped cover a lot of the cost of this. And then Cherry Street Energy is a partner that we've been working with for solar panels and things like that, and some of these other partners. And so that's why it says harnessing the power of partnership here, is that we're stepping out from how do we fund it ourselves? How do we come up with our own money? But this trailer, I will say, is more expensive than any conference could probably pull together on their own. So creating those partnerships is key to who we are and what we do. And so this is the latest, largest expression of what we have. There are two much smaller solar-powered tool trailers, basically, one in the Florida conference and one in the North Carolina conference. And I can't do as much electric as this one, but it can power tools and different things on site in a place where they go. But that's where we are. I know John's asking an estimate. And John, I know the number was shared, but I forgot what it was. But it's I don't know, 20, 30,000, something like that. Yes, the coffee. Oh, the coffee was delicious. It itself is a business venture of one of our churches in the Asheville, North Carolina area, and they brought the coffee, and their business model actually employs formerly incarcerated folks who are making their way back into society and gives them a livable wage and teaches them job skills. And so we partnered with them to bring the coffee. And I think we gave Ilka 4, 5, 6 cups at a time when she stopped by just to make it through the next session. But it was good to see all of you who came by.
That's great. So yeah, I love how, creation care is just deeply integral to Methodism. It layers into all the ways we do ministry, all the ways we care about people, all the ways we show up in the world and witness and love of neighbor. So it's kind of cool. Proof in the solar trailer and all that good coffee. So we're going to talk a little bit more about partnerships, but first, we're going to offer a little bit of a flavor of what it was like in one of those hot committee rooms. I know I spent 4.5 days in a hot committee room. I was the dork in the mask. And the way that you get to know people in a committee room, talking about the legislation, hearing about those things, I want to turn it over to Kathy. She was also like many of us. And so to kind of talk about what that experience was like.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Rashinda and Jonathan. So I'm going to put in the chat two main links if you're wanting more information about updates. As somebody who's part of the communication team, I also want to give a shout out to Rashinda, who served really as our main press person and wrote a lot of articles about what happened. And so I really lift up all of the great news, photos, stories, highlights, and that includes both things that we wrote internally, Rashinda wrote, and others in our group, but also things that United Methodist News covered. One of the goals we had for General Conference, as we were thinking about what kind of presence we wanted, was to increase visibility of the Christian justice movement. And so I wanted to, before I kind of jump into the details of the committees, celebrate that still today, if you go to umnews.org, our news is still there. Let me see if I can get there. So you can see this main story is still showing up as a primary at the, kind of at the top of the page. And so I just want to celebrate that we really did get visibility between the Earth Day event, the rally that happened with Green Faith, the legislation that passed. There were stories that were written about the ways that we were organizing. The solar trailer had a story, and that was such a nice visible way to to be present the second week. There was information about the prayer walk that happened across the street that was developed by Nancy Blade, who's on, and I want to shout out for her hard work on that. And so the visibility, and then there was, Pat and Denise were out front with the banner and were at the table in the exhibit hall. And so that visibility and those conversations was really a huge part of what happened. As I think back on what I want to reflect on in terms of General Conference, the relationship part is huge. It was both, as we've talked about, being able to see some of each other in person, that we've worked together on Zoom for years now, but also to build and strengthen our relationships and our partnerships with other groups, that whether United Women in Faith and all of the hard work around the Earth Day event and around the committee actions, global ministries and the solar trailer, the Church and Society's hard work on the social principles that really were a huge part of what passed at General Conference. United Methodist News Service that did all of these stories. All of these partnerships are going to be crucial. And then also these relationships with the Love Your Neighbor Coalition and Methodist Federation for Social Action, and that and this leads into this committees. So one of the things that the Love Your Neighbor Coalition, I'll call it LINK for short, helped organize were both daily leadership meetings for all of the 15 coalition partners and social gatherings, but they also organized committee observers so that every committee had somebody from LINK that was sitting there observing a committee and tracking legislation. And we met daily to kind of update each other. And we had our own little WhatsApp. I'm using my thumbs because it was on my phone all the time, reporting on what was happening and getting updates from other committees. And so part of what would come out would be some cryptic thing like CS1 just passed resolution number 70983 or something like that. So like those kinds of updates would allow folks who weren't able to be in the room to know if something was happening or if a particular piece passed. And then there were the gatherings like that United Methodist for Kairos Response and Marcha had around issues and topics, and the ways that we work together around with international delegates and translation services. Again, a shout out to LINK for all of their advice around that. And the opportunities to greet at the door. And anyway, just that Love Your Neighbor Coalition was really essential for our ability to be both visible there and effective. So just in terms of reflecting on the committees, I want to talk about process, because that was the other thing that was pretty clear about General Conference. It's really procedural, and there were moments that were incredibly tedious, like just like really painfully slow. But part of the reason it was that way, I think, is because it was really an attempt, what I witnessed anyway, it was an attempt to put really democracy in practice, really for folks to come together across difference and make decisions together, and to create a safe space to do that. So one of the things I hadn't been quite as aware of until I saw it in action was that in every committee and in the plenary floor, there were observers from the Committee on Religion and Race and the Commission on the Status and Role of Women, who would watch and observe and make sure that things were fair, that there were diversity of leaders and so forth. So there was a real attention to fairness and to kindness. There was also, because we are a global church, a huge emphasis on, this is also people speaking different languages, making decisions together. And so some of that tediousness and slowness was for us to go at the speed of the translators. We were continually reminded to slow down and to talk slower so that the translators could keep up, so that the folks listening with their headphones could understand all of what was being said in the process. And there were just kind moments, like at one point our committee I was in Church and Society 1, started half an hour late because we were waiting for some of the delegates who were waiting to get their food reimbursement money from the main hall that wasn't open right away. And so they were just like key things that say, we're not going to make a decision until everybody is here. And then our committee had a chair who was bilingual. And so one day he spoke in English and the second day he spoke in French. And that was also just really useful for all of us to be able to understand that experience and to live into that diversity. So that I wanted to get that as kind of the overall framework, because even though a lot of work happened, it happened within that kind of a kind process that while it isn't perfect, certainly I have some deep respect for it. So the other thing that, so the Church and Society 1 committee that I was in had a core portion of the revised social principles. So what I learned about that was that because there was so much work done on that by Church and Society and this huge coalition of folks over a number of years, I think I heard the word 4,000 people at one point in terms of engaging with the new content of the revised social principles. Because of that preview work, because of the work that had been done ahead of time, it really didn't get a lot of conversation at least in my committee. It was like, yeah, this has already been vetted. This has already been approved. And so for the most part, some of the work of General Conference happens long before General Conference, is one of the lessons I've learned. It's the process of building connections, having relationships, working with trusted partners like Church and Society to do and to formulate new statements for the church. And so that I think is a lesson we can learn in terms of what more might we do to expand the conversation before the next conference, before the next version, so that when you actually get to that committee, they're all like, yeah, that's good. It's been vetted. We're just going to put it on the consent calendar and move ahead. So that was an interesting lesson that I found on those committees. Another thing that we learned, I think, by the committees is that if I understand the process right, delegates somewhat self-select into the committees of the interest. I know that may not be 100% true, but for the most part, different people would gravitate to the committees where they had an interest or a passion. Also something good to keep in mind, so that different committees had different sense of what they were passionate for or interested in. A lot of the more controversial things probably got dealt with more in subcommittees. So you break those groups even smaller. And so some of that, you could really hash out and have a more detailed conversation about something in those subcommittees. Those would then get approved or unapproved and brought back to the full committee, where either they would say, yeah, the subcommittee approved it, we're going to send it on, or they would further have conversation about it. So it provided a place for that kind of procedure, that process to move information forward. Things that passed the committee, but with fewer than 10 no votes, this was something also that I learned, went on to the consent calendar. And so if it was on the consent calendar, for the most part, it just showed up at plenary and a whole bunch of long list, and everybody just said, yep, we're going to approve that. And so what was really exciting for us, and we'll hear a bit more about the details, is that much of the creation justice related petitions went ahead out of committees with fewer than 10 no votes. So they just ended up on consent calendar. They didn't get talked about in the plenary at all. They were talked, sometimes didn't even really get talked about much in the committees. They were just said, yeah, this seems like a good idea. We're gonna put it forward and vote on it and move it ahead. So it's just really interesting to understand that process. And the other thing I think that we also learned a lot about is even if something did get passed or not passed, there's a way to bring it to the floor. So you can have a minority report. So this is something I think we'll hear more about from Rashinda when we hear about what happened with fossil fuel divestment. If it doesn't pass the committee, you can still have a minority report, or you can have 20 people sign it to bring it back to the floor. And so you can get that conversation there too. So just these kind of processes that allow for I really think for a group to make decisions and for a minority of folks to bring a topic forward, even if it didn't end up on the consent calendar. I think that like I said, we learned a lot about process, but I just want to emphasize between the process and the relationships, they really go hand in hand. And it was really because of the relationships we had that we were able to find folks in our committees to speak to certain things, to bring a minority report, to bring a resolution back. It was because of that relationship and partnership that process became possible. And I think that's it, but I'm going to turn it back to Rashinda for the next step, but we're looking forward to digging into all of the things that came out of those committees and figuring out what to do with them next. And we'll talk more about that as we go ahead.
Definitely get to kind of look at the process there and the advantages and the limitations dealing with the scale of Methodist process, right? It's hard to just be in a sort of circle together, there's instead rules about who can speak and when. At the same time, those committees, those places where people can circle up, does bring about those circles. And so there is some of that as well. I want to mention as well, I was at the 2016 General Conference as well as the 2019 General Conference, and the tone of this one. So my goodness, it felt good to be United Methodist again. There was the joy of passing inclusion and the bringing forward of creation justice, the justice mindedness of this particular conference, and the joy of being together seemed to be back. And all of those things just made it a different kind of conference with lots of singing and joyfulness and busy lunches, and it gave me great hope for our denomination. I feel like United Methodism is coming together and ready to just live out God's witness in the world. And my goodness, the joy that gives me. I'm so glad for that. Okay, so I want to pop it over to Karen now. Karen, it was, if you don't know, a delegate. Karen has also been leading the annual conference working team for the United Methodist movement, Creation Justice movement. And Karen's going to share a little bit about what it was like. She's also very active in UW Faith. What it was like as a delegate in this sort of at times of pressure cooker, at other times this joyful expression. Karen, you want to share with us?
Sure. So I'm actually going to start back in 2019, which is when we were elected. And so I think we are the longest serving delegation ever. Virginia delegation is a large delegation. I think the other delegation that's as large is North Georgia. We have 22 delegates, 11 clergy and 11 lay. And starting in 2019, we met monthly until the pandemic. And then we met quarterly via Zoom. And that was an opportunity for us to really look at all of the different aspects of the legislation, the petitions and resolutions that were before us. After the pandemic started to kind of quiet down, we started back to meeting in person about a year ago, and again, continued meeting once a month all the way up until right prior to General Conference. And towards the end, each of the different committees briefed the whole delegation on what legislation was coming before each of our committees. We also were invited to participate in Love Your Neighbor Coalition committee preparation, if you will. And so each of now there are 14 General Conference committees. And so each of those committees would have a subgroup of folks through the Love Your Neighbor Coalition who were centrist to progressive, with an opportunity to come together, talk about the legislation beforehand, kind of get a general sense of which legislation made sense to support, which legislation was an agenda that we didn't want to support. For example, I'm on the local church committee, and we had a piece of legislation come before us calling for further allowing disaffiliations. And the bulk of our committee felt that that was no longer appropriate, and worked on why we felt that was the case, and were successfully able to vote that down in committee so that it did not come to the floor. That said, there were some attempts to bring disaffiliation back to the floor, but on the whole, an overwhelming majority of delegates felt very strongly that disaffiliation was a process that we really did not see as being beneficial to the United Methodist Church moving forward. So that was kind of our preparation beforehand. We also had 4 books. This is just one of them. This was my daily Christian Advocate that I got an addition to every morning, and it got fatter and fatter and fatter. But I had 3 others of these that I had to carry around with me that had all of the petitions that were submitted in 2019, and then the petitions and resolutions that were submitted early this year. So most of us, you would see delegates walking around pulling wheelie bags because our books were frankly just too heavy to carry. So it kind of looked like we were in an airport somewhere, and you see all these people pulling wheelie bags, and probably identified us as to who were the delegates, because we were the ones pulling the luggage. But we did need it. We needed it in committee. We needed it in plenary. We needed it when we were looking at things outside of both plenary and committee to prepare for the next day's session. Each of our days started with a communal breakfast at about 6:30. All of the delegates essentially were fed together, and then the plenary sessions would start at 8 with worship. Our Virginia delegation would meet at 7:40 each morning to pray, to talk about concerns that we might have had, things that we wanted lifted up beforehand, just kind of prepare us for the sessions at hand. So then the plenary session would start with an hour's worth of worship and then move into the business. The first week is the week that we spend time in the committees. So after worship and some announcements and some brief plenary, then we split to our committee meetings and worked through the rest of the day. Our days typically ran until about 6:30-ish. Sometimes a little bit later, and we'd have a lunch break, but then we'd pretty much work through because there was a lot of stuff to get through. We did have Sunday off between the first and second week, and many of us worshiped in various different churches around town. A lot of us at First UMC downtown in Charlotte, which is where we'd had our Earth Day Vigil. It was wonderful. It was a worship service led by 3 bishops, and I think there were at least 6 bishops in the congregation worshiping with us, and the church was packed. I would estimate we probably had about 400 people in church worshiping. It was a very uplifting service. And then we had the afternoon off. I personally went down the street to the 2 art museums that were right downtown and had an opportunity to explore some wonderful artwork. And then several of us who were delegates from Virginia got together and had a nice evening meal of some very fine Mexican food. And then we started in on week 2, which was all plenary. And as Kathy and Rashenda and Jonathan have all said, the tone both weeks was very positive. It was very inspirational. It was very much, we're in this because we want to see the United Methodist Church move forward. I would encourage you, if you have not had an opportunity to listen to some of the bishops' messages that they that they spoke at those worship services, particularly Bishop Bickerton, I think really set the tone at the very beginning. I can't quote his exact words, but it was something to the effect of, we're here because we want the United Methodist Church to move forward. If you don't feel that way, then perhaps you need to go home. And so it really was, this is work. This is positive work. This is work because we want to see the United Methodist Church move forward in a positive way in the future. And there were a few folks from the WCA and the Global Methodist Church there, but they were a very small minority and a very quiet voice. Overwhelmingly, the positive messages of wanting the UMC to begin a new chapter was loud and clear. So we worked hard. Unfortunately, other than the Earth Day vigil, I did not get an opportunity to spend much time with the creation justice movement or fossil free UMC folks because we were at task, and it ran from early morning to late in the evening. But it was good work, and I really feel honored to have represented the church in that way.
Awesome, Karen. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to just pause and give a shout out to Charlotte, North Carolina. It was a lovely place for this conference. I got to ride the light rail, which made it easy and accessible and eco-friendly. And you know what? Everywhere there's macaroni and cheese. This was the cultural thing for me. Is it didn't matter where you were, there was going to be macaroni and cheese. It could be a burger place, it could be a ribs place, it could be a sushi place. You're gonna get macaroni and cheese, and good macaroni and cheese too. They're not gonna waste time making macaroni and cheese that isn't delicious. So shout out to Charlotte, North Carolina, and their macaroni and cheese. Very delicious. Okay, so let's talk about what passed, the legislation that passed. I don't know, Kathy, if you can put that link. I put together this is all the legislation that passed, and I included all the amendments so that it is the final version that got passed. Nancy, are you, okay, there you are. Can I turn it over to you? Or I don't think Bob is with us to just kind of give a quick overview of what we are looking at, because there's a couple of, chunks. Nancy had a tracking document where she was tracking everything. In those documents were plastics and the net zero ones that included audits and plans, as well as like local church ones that included church land and green teams and sustainable practices at annual conferences. So just looking at that overview of, and these things passed by large numbers. These weren't squeakers. These were like 33-1, 43-4. And then in conference, 686-36. These things passed by large numbers.
So the interesting ones, use of plastics, that was from Europe, from Germany. So that was kind of interesting that they had proposed that, and it went pretty quickly with no amendments. My one on sustainable practices for annual conference session got a lot of talk in committee. Wasn't good for the African conferences, but the European conferences really liked it. So there was an amendment, which was a pretty good amendment, and then it passed on the consent calendar at the very end. Green team formations, I mean, those things just went right into it. And what we're going to have as a result of it is some structure within the book of discipline that our local churches can point right to that and say, we need to have a conference creation care coordinator, and we'll be able to use. Was a one from New York that was talking about new construction that did not pass at all. Defeated. There were another one on the land use may have had an amendment. Maybe Kim could speak a little bit more. I didn't track that as well because I knew she was there tracking that. But the other ones, the net zero greenhouse gas, that all passed, New Green Deal initiative that passed. So sometimes there was more than one piece of legislation, so it would be turned down in preference for another one that was very similar, which is what happened to our 717 document, the divestment. Although someone may want to talk a little bit more about that one, but it was argued well in committee and then had a minority report. So, but I mean, that's really all I have. Kathy, I don't know if you want to add anything to it. I'm not really sure what you're looking for since I wasn't on the preview call.
That was perfect. And I realized in the last week, as I've sent you emails, Nancy, Nancy's in the midst of moving to a new church. And so like she did so much in preparation for General Conference and after, and then like immediately went back to move. So just want to shout out for all of the work that Nancy's been doing. This particular document built off of the tracking that Nancy did, that Rashinda pulled together the actual text. And so I just wanted, this is linked on the homepage of the Creation Justice Movement under the updates, under the General Conference updates. And so you can go back and study it. This top part is a nice little summary. And then each one gives you the specifics about who submitted it, what committee approved it, how it was voted, and then the actual text. And so I really hope you all go back and just really study this. And in fact, here's the church land use one. Some of these, I would hope, one of my dreams, and we haven't quite figured this out, is can we come up with like some study guides and some questions? So we might take it back to our local churches or our annual conference teams and say, well, what does this tell us? What might we do with this? What resources do we need? What more might we, what kind of next steps are needed? And so again, I'm not going to go through the whole document there, but I really commend it to you because a lot of really great, beautiful new words did get passed, and it's going to be up to us to implement them and to think through what it means to have a green team, a land use, net zero, and emission reduction, obligation or a strong mandate to have a creation justice leader in each conference, all of that work. So we passed a lot, and it's exciting to start to sift through it all. I'll stop talking at that point. Maybe Karen, and then.
Yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I
just want to say one more thing on that.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Nancy.
Nancy,
I wanted to add that when we take this back to our local churches, I just want to say the book of resolutions needs to be used more often. What we have in there for the green teams is really explicit on how to build a green team. So start looking at that book of resolutions, buy one of them. That's it.
Awesome, thank you. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, we've talked about the fact that a lot of these passed overwhelmingly in committee and then went on to the consent calendar. And where that is absolutely wonderful, because we knew that those were then highly unlikely to be voted down. In fact, they were voted overwhelmingly in favor. But what it didn't do is bring then creation justice as visibly to the floor of the plenary. And that's the one drawback that I see in that. So that is, I think, part of the work that we need to do now, in that is to bring these things more vocally back to our annual conferences, to our districts, to our local churches, because of the fact that they passed so favorably in General Conference. They didn't get a lot of airing on the plenary floor.
So that's a really good point. There's still this invisibility aspect about creation justice, right? Our Western bishops made a video, and then my bishop made a video, and none of that mentioned creation justice. Like, this is a huge part of what General Conference, and it's still not worth mentioning, apparently. But that's why I included the numbers of yays and nays, so that when you go back to your conference, you can show your bishop, you can show your director of connectional ministries that no, in fact, this isn't invisible. This is overwhelmingly supported by the body of the church. And we want action on this. We want our churches to attend to this. And If you look at the areas where, like in P&W, when we passed divestment, we passed not green teams, we passed like 4 different things, including divestment. It was 80 to 95% of the body, 100% of the body, in one case, I think like 99 or something. This is overwhelming support. And what we were hearing from connectional ministries and what we were hearing from DSs were people don't really care about that. Well, that's just simply not true. People do care about this. And so having those statistics, being able to show the numbers will be helpful. So yes. Okay. And let's see, I'm thinking of macaroni and cheese again. Oh, fossil free. Okay. So I'm going to just really touch on this quickly, and Ilka is here, and Ilka was United Women in Faith, and Ilka Vega were just amazing in this whole process, bringing the power of United Methodist women, United Women in Faith, to this annual conference in a really significant way. But Fossil Free UMC is a divestment. Sharon Delgado is also here, and she's the convener of the Fossil Free UMC movement. So, right, we go straight. We had submitted a petition asking for fossil fuels to be included in the exclusions so that United Methodist wouldn't invest in them, especially Westpath. Westpath also had a petition. They wanted to be given the permission to continue to invest heavily, $1.3 billion or more, in fossil fuels for the purposes of engagement and because they want to continue sort of a more wide investment policy. So this was a conversation for 4 days in the subcommittee and committee. What happened was the Westpath petition came up first, which meant that ours was subsumed into that. The amendment was brought to include fossil fuels as an exclusion, and we lost by 2 votes. So we felt like that our committee was more conservative than the general plenary, which was absolutely busting out with justice. And so we basically had to ask everybody who voted no on that petition to offer their support of a minority report that would allow us to bring it to the plenary for conversation, which we really felt like it needed to be heard. There's so much support for it across the world. So Ilka Vega just powered that, and the members of the Link Coalition. So our whole coalition, the coalition power there really mattered. And we got those people to say, yes, they would support a minority report. Also, some of them changed their mind and then now wanted to vote for divestment. So unfortunately, our time got squeezed. So there was just so much that happened at General Conference. And because it was a minority report, it needed to be dealt with individually by the body, not on a consent calendar. And so days ticked by. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We got to 90 minutes left, and there was a surprise motion on the floor by a delegate, Lonnie Chaffin, who basically, I think, and I hope, intended to be helpful, but the motion was to refer a bunch of things that had not been dealt with, and I think the idea was to save time. Of course, it didn't save time because the ones that were referred were things that needed to be dealt with on plenary. So then Robert's rules becomes very clumsy because you have to have each delegate speak to it and each amendment. And the queue to speak was absolutely bursting full. The WhatsApp and the Signal and the texting was going crazy because so many people wanted this to come to the floor, and suddenly it's not coming to the floor. So it was agonizing. Those last 90 minutes with 7 minutes to go. Finally, Lonnie Chaffin had heard from a lot of his colleagues. They did not want this to be referred. They wanted it to come to the floor. And so he's at the microphone waving at the bishop, trying to get the bishop's attention. Lots of delegates were waving their flags, trying to get the bishop's attention so that they would be called on to speak. And it was just too late. So the vote came up to, do we extend in this last 6 minutes with 5 minutes to go? We out to at least have a conversation. So we still had a lot of support even then. So the good news is we have tremendous support in this denomination for divestment. Absolutely tremendous support. Um, the other piece of good news is we get to bring this again. So that's what we will do. And we will continue working in our conferences. Like I say, PNW, their faith foundation divested. We asked for divestment. We got it. So you can do the same thing in your conference. And I'm going to now turn it over to Ilka because what a powerhouse, and how grateful I am to Ilka for all of her effort and presence at General Conference.
Thank you, Richard. And the feeling is really mutual. I wish I need to do a better job of promoting the work that you did, just as much as you promote the work of the coalition, because we were really just going back and forth all the time and texting about what was going on and strategizing and trying to bring all the coalition group along. And I really just want to acknowledge just the effort again that was behind, and some of the people that were engaged, including our former General Secretary at United Women in Faith, Harriet Olson, who was also key in helping us navigate the process, even just for advice on how do we carry out this minority report that we wanted to do, and how do we get that practically, to happen in terms of steps and guidance. So I think just highlighting the institutional knowledge that is very much needed for those aspects, just in terms of strategy and moving forward. It was my first general conference too, and I realized I just jumped in and didn't introduce myself, but I am with United Women in Faith, as you might already catch on. But yeah, just learning as we go, and really kind of standing in the shoulders of people that had more experience and the coalition that was there. And I really want to acknowledge also Judy and Lois, who are United Women in Faith members, and they're here, who have been organizing also for UMC and with the coalition, and that were pushing us for us to align as an organization against thinking of this institutional movement towards endorsing fossil-free UMC, and how do we commit also with our own money, right? And really put into practice what we're trying to preach. And in terms of organizing, I'm just really amazed at what the group was able to do. Richard already shared. Unfortunately, I was able to leave. I had to leave the last minutes, right? So they were voting on this, and so my phone was just busting with messages and trying to coordinate people. And just so many amazing folks that were there. Andy Oliver, also from Reconciling Ministries and Methodist Federation for Social Action, as well as Link, which was already mentioned. Love Your Neighbor Coalition were just amazing folks that where we were reaching out to, who had delegates also they were working with on the floor, and they were able to bring these issues on. And so it really speaks of a great general conference, and a lot of people just really powered for action. And I think thinking ahead and just thinking strategy for next time, thinking of getting on those WhatsApp groups ahead of time as we're moving in, and creating them to have more organizing room and getting to know people before getting there. Because I think I get to meet everybody for the first time, and when I was there, including a lot of folks here in the call from Creation Justice Movement, but also just a lot of people that just organically meet in the events. But thinking more actively, I think the more we can reach out to people, especially as we know who the new delegates are going to be, and who we can connect to, and then reinforcing those connections once we're on the ground. It's super, super important. And like I think Kathy and others have already mentioned, just doing that work long before General Conference, so that when we get there, it's kind of like, okay, we already know what we're going to do and what we're supporting, and also having like plan A, B, and C, because that was the only tricky part that I was talking with Richinda, having to have like amendments that we would have to do in case things didn't pass, and how do we negotiate those among the coalition and whatnot. And so having plan A, B, and C, moving into that space, and knowing that it's also all up to the Holy Spirit and how things are going to move once you're actually on the ground. But just lessons learned, and really happy to be part of such a good crowd of people that are mentors and leaders, and that push us to do better. So I'm just very thankful for that. And I don't know who I would need to pass it next, so I'll pass it back to you, Richard.
Okay, wonderful. Yes. So we have talked about what's going to happen to next to some degree, but we're going to maybe underscore that a little bit more. One thing I do want you to know, all of y'all. So hopefully, in hearing this, you understand that part of the reason we're sharing this is because we feel like all of you are part of what happened in General Conference. That all of you, and some of you I know helped write things or in meetings, others of you just were absolutely cheering on from the sidelines. All of that is the movement. All of that is all of us. And so I just want to just take a moment to say thank you to everybody for your prayers, your goodwill, your energy, your work. If you're just in a little church, just sharing with people about how it went, that couldn't be more important. And so thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you to all of you for being part of this movement. The other thing, we're not going to be going to breakout rooms because we feel like this conversation is so important and so much all of us, about all of us. We're going to just continue a conversation and encourage people to think about if you have a question or something, that we're going to really start looking at those to just more answer those specifically. I'm going to pop it over back to Kathy to talk about a little bit more about what we're thinking of when we talk about what comes next.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to see some of the questions coming up is like, are we going to talk more about the legislation? We're going to talk more about what's next. And so I'm so glad that is where you all are feeling the energy bubbling up, because that is indeed what, as we're all like, oh, what just happened? What are we going to do with all of that? As I've said before, like, we do have a lot of beautiful words in this denomination, particularly around creation justice. And so it is up to us to make those words action, to bring those new words that we just approved and provide actual implementation in the world, to embody them in the world. They provide these words, and these petitions provide authority and support for those actions, but they're not going to make it happen. And so as it's been talked about before, General Conference also was not a place where these topics were discussed at length. There's so much happening at a procedural level that there just isn't space for that. But that conversation is ripe to be had now that these new words are out. And so we want to dream together with all of you, and maybe that's what the rest of this conversation employs, is ideas about how to live into these words. So I just want to lift up a few things that are already starting to bubble up. So first of all, we now have a strong encouragement that every annual conference have a caretakers of God's creation, or a creation justice movement leader. And so what does that mean to help support our annual conference organizing? We have an annual conference organizing team. We're going to be meeting Monday. We're going to be talking more in detail about what that means, how we make that happen, how we help continue to support and call up leadership and teams and action at that in key structural place in our denomination at that annual conference level. We also, as it's been talked about, have these new documents about green teams and land use and reducing use of plastic, all of which are really ripe for local church conversation. I would love to see our local churches digging into those documents and asking themselves, how do we make this happen in our church? There was a question earlier, is this all required? Well, no, I mean, that is key. We can't require it of everybody, but it is strongly encouraged. And that gives you the authority to go back to your local church and say, we really should do this. I have an interest in doing it. Can we pull together a team? Or I'd like to pull together a team. Let's read through this and dream about what we could do next in terms of our actions. And so as a creation justice movement, we'll be continuing to talk about how do we support that? How do we resource that? There's some exciting training materials coming forward. Chris Sinkowitz has got a contract with Discipleship Ministries to do a Be Disciple program around green teams. And there's more around land use and so forth. And then how do we also help annual conferences support local churches in doing that work? And then the last big bundle of work is all around the clean energy transition and reducing our emissions toward addressing climate change. And so there's a lot of work that is now kind of authorized by the church to have us go back to our churches and our conferences and our communities and say, how do we make this transition? What can we do to solarize our local churches, to weatherize our local churches, those kinds of things? How might the conferences be set up to support that work? There was a a fun little conversation that happened after the coordinating team meeting yesterday. And most of you who were on the coordinating team didn't even get to hear about how an annual conference could really support structurally the work of solarizing our local churches. So there's just a lot of exciting things that we can dig into there. And then I saw a couple of questions about what wasn't included in there. And so the last thing I'm going to say is that the thing that I learned about General Conference is that it just takes an individual having an idea, drafting that, submitting it to General Conference, and it can be heard. Same thing is true at the annual conference level. So what is not yet in our books, what is not yet in those words, what's not yet in our structure of action that could be added, that we can talk about, that we can build discussion around and support around, please share those ideas in the next part of this conversation, because that's also the work that we'll be thinking about. It's not just what passed, but what else needs to be done. So I'll turn it back to you, Rashinda, to moderate this last part.
Okay, awesome. And I'm mid comment in responding to, unfortunately, my chat is hard to, you don't get enough of a window, but the person I'm responding to, will this be a funded position, the caretaker for God's creation person? And it's in the Church and Society area legislation. It's alongside the Peace with Justice coordinator. So there's a sense that it could be similarly structured. There isn't any funding attached to that, but your annual conference could attach funding to that. And you could be involved in the conversation on how that gets rolled out. And we could start, I think, why is there needs to be money that comes to these things. And there's no reason why this movement couldn't develop that into a position that is funded. And I think should, right? I mean, we should be funding the things that we are voting for in record numbers. So yeah, that's ahead of us. Okay, so now I would love to hear from folks. And so there's a couple of things I'd like us to do is, one is to use the raised hand feature, because that's really helpful to me to see who'd like to ask a question. If there's somebody in particular you want to ask a question of, if you could ask that person, or just in general have a topic. And Jonathan, I see you. And also I'd like for folks who are kind of been sharing in this conversation, keep an eye on the chat. And if you see a question come up that you think should be really addressed, you raise your hand and bring that question forward. So how does that sound? Does that sound like a good way for next steps? Okay. All right, perfect. So Jonathan, you're on deck. Go ahead.
Thanks, Rashinda. I was just going to jump in and say all the questions that we have in the chat are talking about, okay, what is next? What do we do next? Some of our conversations sounds like, okay, here's what we did now. There'll be another general conference coming up in 4 years. We don't wait until the next general conference. The beauty of what has happened now, many of us have been trying to get things done on the district or conference level, but we haven't had a whole lot of traction. Now we actually have the support, what we've been talking about, all of these petitions and these resolutions and things that pass by overwhelming margins. Now we have that language. So go to the document on what passed at General Conference and begin looking through what actually passed and start talking with those who are in your own sphere of influence. That's kind of where we in my annual conference, in the Western North Carolina Conference, we're kind of ahead of the curve in comparison to some other conferences, but we've been doing this for a number of years. And what we did was we began looking at what can happen next, what are the low-hanging fruit, where do we start, how do we start sharing the message? But we didn't have all this verbiage that was passed by General Conference to back us up. Now we're looking at it and saying, okay, we've got these documents that we can now take to UWF groups and to local church council meetings. We can begin to put this forth and say, all right, how does this happen? And one of the ways that we're doing that in our annual conference is we had a conversation, we being our creation care ministry team for the annual conference. We met with the bishop and said, hey, this is important. We know it's important. We know you know it's important, but you have so much already on your plate. We would like to help make this happen. We would like to come together as the creation care minded people of the annual conference and look for ways to implement what we're talking about here. And what we need from you, Bishop, is not more of your time. We just need an occasional opportunity where you share why this is important to you. It's happened several times now in the last year, and every time the interest level within the annual conference has shot up over these creation care activities because we got the right voice saying it, and then we're doing the work. That's where it comes back to. You can't wait on anybody else to do this work. We are the ones who will pick up our tools and begin to do the work. So these documents are now in our toolbox. So let's put them to use. So those are some thoughts that I wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. And one of the things that PNW did this year is they submitted a resolution asking for budget consideration. We want to be in the budget. And whew, that's going to be a wild ride. So be in prayer for us, please. All right, so Nancy, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on how do we get a creation care coordinator in our annual conference. And it does say in the legislation that the Board of Church and Society should be nominating the person. But beyond that, you know, we also need to think of asking our bishop to expand the portfolio of conference staff people to include this. And so I know Grace is on the call here, but Grace from New England Conference is their first creation care coordinator and has had to find her own way through getting the job identified on conference staff. So maybe she wants to say a word about that too.
Yeah, Grace, do you want to speak to that? And Becca Edwards in Texas as well has got a hybrid, you know, half Texas Impact, half conference staff. So that might be some first steps. I think North Carolina as well has a director of missions towards. So you can leverage what's happening at these other conferences to show your bishop, hey, this can be done. And that's part of what we're trying to do in PNW. Go ahead, Grace.
Becca's half is with the General Board of Global Church and Society.
Hold on just a second. Yeah, Mel, can you just hold that thought for a second? I want to hear from Grace as Nancy had asked her to respond to the question.
Thanks everybody. I'll be brief. I guess just touching back on what Nancy was referring to, even though I'm 10 months into this paid position, it's a sort of a nebulous area. North Carolina has been doing so much work for so long. You guys have the grassroots going on already. And New England sort of has some good ideas and hot spots. And so even though I come through from the Board of Church and Society in our conference, that's how I'm structurally where my job lies. It's just imperative for whoever's doing this, volunteer or not, to be able to intersect with every agency, every committee, with missions, with peace, with justice, with everything that's going on, because climate does intersect with all of our everything that we're trying to do. It's imperative. So I would really encourage to broaden the scope and to try to bring to gather as many people at the table and draw that circle wide. That's what seems to be happening well here anyway. Thank you both.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah, and please ask Grace more questions in the chat because she's lived this, right? And she is living, breathing proof, wonderful proof that this can happen. Go ahead, Mel. Thanks for waiting on that.
Sure. Becca Edwards is half-time with Texas Impact and half with General Board of Church and Society, not with an annual conference. But what I was going to say is that yesterday our South Central Jurisdiction Steering Committee met, and this was a topic of lengthy discussion on how do we implement these positions of caretakers of God's creation. And we are in the process of putting together a grant proposal that we're going to try to get a grant that will cover each of the annual conferences in our jurisdiction to fund these positions. And so we will keep you informed as to how that proceeds, but this is a way that we're going to approach it in the South Central jurisdiction.
That's awesome. And I don't know how much of that you could make public for helping to resource others in the movement so that they can take a look at what you've done and maybe glean some of the language and some of the processes.
We're just in the, I mean, yesterday afternoon was the very first we've talked about it. So we're in the formation stage at this point, but when we get more details, we will be more than happy to share those.
That's fantastic. Yeah, The other thing too is like you can lean into partnerships that already exist. So in Oregon, Idaho, there's no church and society. That's not how they do things. So they have different structures. So you can lean into the structures that are already there. And one of the structures is going to be there is United Women in Faith. And so talking with their leadership and United Women in Faith and asking, how can we is it okay if Judy, I didn't warn you, so I would love to call on you though, because you were at General Conference and you've been very involved in this and you're involved in the UW faith in your context, right? Um, what is it like being, involved with such a big, powerful group in the Methodist Church in the annual conference setting? And how could you, do you want to just reflect on that at all? Or you can say no, because I did just, we sat together. We were seat buddies for 4 days in committees. So I feel like Judy and I are best friends now. So I can just call on her. But
Well, that was one of the
Judy,
best parts, sure, of General Conference for me, was just getting to know Rashenda and Ilka and those people that I had only seen on Zoom working on fossil-free UMC, and Nancy Blade too. But it's wonderful to be part of a longtime member of United Methodist Women, now United Women in Faith, and to work both on the local level in all of our churches. We have a chance to organize the women and the girls to be this voice for justice, for environmental justice. We've always had that history, that the women in the Methodist Church have led the way. And this is another example of where we have to be strong. We have to lead, and we have to continue to spread the word. I say, to publicize the critical nature of saving our environment, saving our world, God's great gift to us. We must take care of it. So it's wonderful to be part of a large organization, but we all, like the United Women in Faith, which does have power, but in our local environment, our local churches, it's so important just to spread the word by our own enthusiasm and passion for justice.
thank you, Judy. Thank you too for jumping in. Elizabeth, do you want to add to that, or do you have? I want to call on you and see where you're going to take us next. You're muted. Are you able?
I'm
Yeah,
so sorry. I'm on my cell phone and I can't find the buttons from my cell phone. As we think about this exciting work that has been done and what is before us, it is so very exciting. I think as we draw more people into this, the network will be so very important. And like most of us, or a lot of us, recognize each other on this call and from other calls like this. But as we invite more people in, I'm thinking about the possibility of using that creation care network from Global Ministries and what an important tool it can be if we choose to engage it in that way. So that we can see who else is starting green teams around us, who else is doing work in their conference levels, and what is working, and what, how do we gain tools from each other. So I just want to lift that up to the group.
So yeah, so for those who are not as aware, I mean everybody's aware, but just to fill in some background there. Global Missions, of course, has been working with a creation care lens and doing work, including Earth Keepers, and has created a social platform where you can have a conversation, share with people what you're going to do. And I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan because he is the one in the midst of that and always encouraging me to use that platform. So go ahead, Jonathan. How would people access that platform, and what kinds of things could be done with it?
Absolutely. Thanks for that invitation. So the link Kathy just put in the chat is for creationcare.umcmission.org. This will take you to the Global Ministries Creation Care Network, and this is a private online network. It's not social media. You don't have all kinds of logarithms that come in and twist things around. This is a connection between United Methodists involved in creation care and justice ministry. And these are United Methodists from around the world on the network. And you can find on this network where people are close to you. You can find people who have similar interests of what you're doing. There are constantly comments, articles being shared, information coming up, invitations to webinars. This is a great resourcing opportunity for you to find out what else is going on in the world of creation care and preparation and training. You can text one another like you would on your phone through the platform and ask specific people questions and find out more information. And you can also look on our projects page where the Earth Keepers and others have put information about what they're actually doing in creation care and creation justice. And if you're looking for ideas or want to see what's possible, there is no better place to go than to look at that projects page and see the diversity, the creativity, the involvement of putting faith together with hands-on grassroots efforts at all different levels of church and society. And so we invite you to go to creationcare.umcmission.org and sign up for the Creation Care Network if you're not already on there. And I'll get that information and we'll welcome you in and make sure that you're connected with your annual conference, your jurisdictional groups in the network so that you can then plug in and get to know each other. So that's a wonderful opportunity to do that. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, so there's the Earth Keeper training, which connects you with other people obviously working on that. But there's also a lot of talk around, how do we resource people? What are the next steps of training, right? So there's been shared interest in the conversations of the movement around having more teach-ins and helping people to see what materials are already available and how to, if you haven't, connected with that material, what do you need to help support that? Like where can if you're in a group where you're like, I just really want to learn more about what climate change even is, or ways in which they impact the social world, right? My neighbors and me. These are things we'd be curious to hear. Like what would you really like to learn? What's in front of you that you feel like would be helpful? So so let us know what you think. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
So I think God has a sense of timing about this because after I wrote the proposal to go to for the resolution, I kind of got busy with other things, and then all of a sudden we got a phone call, my husband, from the Be a Disciple online learning group, and they were saying, we are doing now a new microcourse format, and would you be interested? And Ed said, sure, for him. And then he said, I think Chris would be interested too. And it just popped out of my mouth. And I said, sure, I could do something on green teams. And lo and behold, that was before General Conference. So I already had started to work on that and now officially an instructor, and the course will be ready in probably July, maybe early August, but it will be officially out then. It's a 3-hour Zoom webinar, and I'm going to be focusing in on engaging scripture and tradition, how they inform us, looking at me power versus, and in addition to we power, and then engaging, empowering, and encouraging green teams, and then how do we get started and what you can do. It has the 3-hour format and then 4 days following. So it starts on a Monday with a not a late evening, but an evening Zoom, and then asynchronous discussion board on the next 4 days with specific assignments, which is an excellent place to exchange ideas with other people. So more news at 11.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. And as this movement grows, this intentional, movement building about coalitions, and Kathy had spoken some about the link connection, which includes connection to organizations like Marcha and the Native American ministries within the United Methodist Church, Black voices within United Methodist Church. So all these voices become really important to the way we sort of create the tapestry of creation care together. And I want to acknowledge somebody here again, not to now, Gezu, I'm not going to put you on the spot this time, make you talk or anything, but we Gezu is currently in Ethiopia and is been working in Ethiopia on creation care, teaching classes to young people. He was profiled on Fossil Free UMC for his voice for divestment and why it's important to Africans and people in East Africa. And so, Geza, do you want to say hello? Or I don't want to put you on the spot. I don't know what your Zoom. There you are. So welcome. So this is part of the coalition, the vital coalition work that we're doing.
Yeah, I've been introduced to you by the grace of God through the Klama professor, and he introduced me to work with the Christian justice movement with the context of the United Methodist Church. So I've been working with the Earth Charter for a long years in the protection of the environment with the green initiatives. And then I have already extended that program into the UMC channel through you to work together for the future sustainable way of life. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's just good to see you here. So I know Zoom in different places, even, Illinois. I know, Nancy, you were freezing up there. So Zoom can be imperfect, but thank you for being here. I'm glad you're here. So we have 5 minutes left. And you know what? We haven't designated someone to bring the final prayer. So if you are feeling inspired to offer a final prayer, I would say just ping me, send me a private message. Just the whole thing, I guess, just seems pretty prayerful. So any last things? I'm going to turn over to Kathy. Is there any last things you want to be sure to mention?
Well, I'm really glad we were able to introduce Gezu, and because one of the other things that happened at General Conference was the ability to make some personal connections with folks from around the world. And with increased, while we've long had this desire, there's an increased ability, I think, given the relationships now, to build out the movement in other parts of the world. So we're not going to tell folks what to do, but to the extent that we can create spaces for folks to have conversations where we can connect people that we've been meeting with each other, that we can help ask the same question we're asking ourselves: what more might we do together? How might we support each other in doing that work? All of those good questions are even richer when we're asking them with people who are coming with a variety of perspectives and experiences. And so that will be true both in all of the new connections that we're making in Africa and Europe and the Philippines and beyond, and within the United Methodist Church. And Rashinda mentioned the connections that I was very grateful to be able to get to know better folks with the Native American Indigenous Caucus. Ragi was able to bless us literally with a blessing prior to the Earth Day event, and was present in a variety of events there. Monique from the Black Methodist for Church Renewal, folks from Lisette with Marcha, the Hispanic Caucus, folks from the United Methodist for Kairos Response, where there's overlap between violence and war and climate and all of those good conversations. There's so many future conversations that are now a little bit more possible because of those relationships. And so we're seeking out kind of what are some next steps. So it's my hope that we'll see some of those folks in this Movement Cafe space, in our newsletter, in future conversations. But we welcome all of those diverse ideas into the future planning of what comes next. And I think that's all I wanted to say. So go ahead, Rashinda.
Okay, so I'm not getting a trampling of people who would like to lift the final prayer. So I'm going to go ahead and read some from my very, 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 very favorite Psalm, which is Psalm 104 that a lot of you will already know. So the reading begins. Let my whole being bless the Lord. Lord my God, how fantastic you are. You are clothed in glory and grandeur. You wear light like a robe. You open the skies like a curtain. You build your lofty house on the water. You make your clouds your chariot, going around on the wings of the wind. You make the winds your messengers. You make fire and flame your ministers. You establish the earth on its foundations so that it will never fail. Lord, you have done so many things. You have made them all so wisely. The earth is full of your creations. Then there's the sea, wide and deep, with its countless creatures, living things, both large and small. There go the ships on it. The Leviathan which you made plays in it. All your creations wait for you to give them their food on time. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled completely full. Let the Lord's glory last forever. Let the Lord rejoice in all that God has made. For God only looks to the earth and it shakes. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praises to my God. Amen. I love that song. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And oh my goodness, the work begins again. We are renewed for living out what good things the Lord has made. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing all of you very soon.
Thanks, Lucinda.